I want to welcome everyone to a NAMI Davidson County education session. I'm Don Liacono, the program manager at NAMI Davidson. I'm also a peer with lived experience and a caregiver to a soon-to-be 19-year-old offspring who inherited some of mine and some of mom's mental health challenges. So the genetic pool can be sometimes unforgiving. But I'm also someone who's been in crisis before. So tonight's education session called Lessons Learned in Crisis Intervention is an important topic for me. So I'm going to introduce Violet Gao, our presenter, who is a co-response crisis supervisor at the Mental Health Co-op, who is also a community partner of ours. So I'd like to say, Violet, take it over.
Thank you so much. Yes, we love NAMI and working with you all. So I'm very excited to be here to present today. I am a crisis counselor. I work with our Partners in Care program in the community where we partner with police. I'll talk a little bit about that in a presentation. So before we get started, I just want to get a good idea of what people think of when they think of a crisis, just to get an idea of maybe what people know so far, maybe don't know. So if you want to just unmute and share, that would be great. Or if you prefer using the chat, that would be okay too. Oh, I thought I heard somebody. No, okay. So just kind of think about, what would you consider a crisis? How do you know if someone is in crisis? So right now we're just kind of getting a gauge. So there's really no right or wrong answer here, just kind of seeing what people think.
Oh. Someone in the chat has said emotional panic.
Okay. Yes. Emotions have a big part to play when people are in crisis. I think there's another chat. Yep. High emotions, crying, yelling. Significant distressing event or distressing reaction to that event. Yes. Great. So yes, today we're going to go over what it looks like, what a crisis might look like. You know, I think a lot of the times we think the big kind of overwhelming emotions, and sometimes the other end of that could be a crisis as well. Oftentimes someone could be in a crisis and be a little bit more withdrawn. And so we're going to talk through maybe what some of that looks like. So just to get us started, I do want to say every crisis looks different. So how one person experiences it, and even when you see the same person in crisis, how they are when they are in crisis the first time can be drastically, significantly different than what it looks like that next time. So as we go through this presentation, just know that there is not one way or one criteria that a person meets to be in crisis, nor is it your role. So I just want to put this out there that it's not your role to determine and not your responsibility to determine if someone is in crisis. You know, if you're feeling uncomfortable about that person leaving, you have concerns for their safety, you can always reach out to mobile crisis. I realize there's some people too on this call that are not in Nashville. And so MMPDs are Metro Nashville Police Department. So your equivalent of police or community resources, but just know that it's not your responsibility to determine a crisis, but it is within our role and within our realm to support a person as best we can and to seek those additional resources if we feel we're unable to manage a situation. So as we know, crisis looks a little bit different. You know, a lot of the times the person is in emotional distress. Here are some of the things that we can consider if we're kind of figuring out if someone is in crisis. Here are the things that crisis counselors will often look at. So that inability to maintain safety. Is this person potentially experiencing some suicidal ideations, but potentially like they feel safe, they have a good support system, they're not going to act on it, versus, you know, they have a plan and they're actively feeling that. That fear of harm towards self and others. So oftentimes, you know, a person in crisis could potentially be a little bit more erratic, or maybe kind of have those impulsivity. And so oftentimes there's that kind of just gut feeling, or you hear them saying things that kind of cause some of that fear of whether they can be safe. And then, as we talked about, the suicidal ideations. So those feelings or statements of someone saying they're suicidal, and then self-harming behaviors, and then homicidal ideations. So just thoughts of harming or hurting other people, and psychosis. I think psychosis is one where it can be a little bit more difficult to maybe see or determine sometimes. Sometimes psychosis can be, those hallucinations, someone seeing something that's not there, or visual, or auditory, maybe hearing voices. Sometimes it can be delusions, somebody that has a belief that maybe someone is after them when there's no proof or concrete facts of that. And then I do just want to add that today, talking about crisis, we are going to be talking about some difficult topics. So if it is difficult for some people, you need to step away, that's okay. Or if you have questions in the moment and just want to ask them right then and there, that's okay too. I think Dog's going to keep a track of the chat for me in case anyone puts any comments in there that maybe we need to address. So, okay. So maintaining safety, right? So our first and foremost is maintaining safety, but not just the person's safety when they're in crisis, but also your own safety. So knowing your process in your workplace or organization, right? So I think where people are, hopefully there is a process in place of, if someone is in crisis or you think someone might be in crisis, who do you notify, right? Who is your first point of contact? Who is your support there? What does that process look like? So that could be really important to just know that ahead of time before the crisis happens. And then make sure you're feeling safe, right? If we're not at a place where we're emotionally feeling stable, where we're comfortable, oftentimes it's very difficult to support other people. So if you're feeling unsafe, it's okay to say, I can't manage this. I'm not sure how to, or I'm not at a place myself where I feel like I can manage it. And that's okay if you do need to remove yourself, and we'll talk about what that looks like. And then assess for safety in the environment, right? Are there any weapons around, any sharp objects? Are you inside a room where potentially it's, a little bit more contained, a little bit more safe? Or are you talking to someone standing outside in a parking lot where maybe the environment is more unpredictable, right? There could be cars going by, there could be a lot of other things going on. And so just noticing your surroundings and where you are and just kind of maintaining that awareness. Okay. Yep. So this next part is asking questions. So if you have determined safety, you feel like I'm in a good place, I feel comfortable talking to this person, it's okay to ask questions and be direct. I think not so much now, but for a long time, there was a myth that, if you bring up somebody feeling suicidal, or if you ask someone if they want to kill themselves, that it's going to lead them to have those thoughts. And we have found that that's not true. Oftentimes, people who are in crisis want you to be direct with them, want to have those conversations. So if a client or if somebody kind of discloses these things, here are just some questions that you can ask them. Are you feeling suicidal? Do you want to hurt yourself or anyone else? If a person says yes, you can ask if they have a plan. If they have a plan, talk with them about intent. Are you thinking about acting on it? Do you have a plan to do it? And then asking them, how long have you been feeling this way? Oftentimes, once you get somebody talking, they're willing and most of the time like wanting to engage and share what's going on. A lot of the times, major recent stressors can cause people to feel more impulsive and hopeless. And let me go back now. And maybe have some of those feelings and thoughts. And so I think someone else has put in the chat, a lot of the times it's the stressors, the things that are going on in your life, the financial, maybe the loss of somebody, or not having your basic needs met. All those things can be factors that can play into kind of leading a person into crisis. So if a person is suicidal, has a plan, reach out to Mobile Crisis. Again, this is the number, and you'll see it again later, for Mobile Crisis in Davidson County. However, I believe every city should have a mobile crisis of some type. And if you need support or would like some support, just kind of figuring out what that looks like in your city, I am more than happy to work with you and kind of delve into that a little bit deeper, for sure. So if a person needs immediate attention, we always want to call that kind of 911 if it's medical, right? If a person has already harmed themselves, if it's to the point where you're like, I can't keep them safe, I don't know how, they need that extra care. I think sometimes in the helping profession, we tend to want to jump in and do a lot and support a person. But I think something really important to remember in crisis is that you don't have to do it all. It does not all have to fall on your shoulders. It's okay, and sometimes it's better to say, okay, I've done what I can. Let me trust that other people are going to do what they can as well. And so if a person has any weapons, sharp objects, medications, anything like that, discloses that as a plan. Try to see if they'll give it to you or another person for safekeeping. Oftentimes if people are talking with you, engaging, they're going to be willing to give those things up.
And Violet, I was going to interject because George reminded us in the text, you can also call 988 if it's a mental health crisis. That is nationwide, and they will direct you to your local crisis unit.
Yes, 100%. 988 is a great resource. And it's very easy to dial, and they will, you're right, get you connected to where you are. So that is a good number to use, no matter where you are. So, yep. Okay. So this next part, just kind of gather information and actively listen. So oftentimes the person might not want to talk to you. We kind of talk about that crisis. There might be heightened emotions, or there could be that withdrawal, where someone is just sitting there and they're not engaging. You ask them a few questions, you maybe notice their body language, they're just not quite ready, or maybe they're feeling a lot of emotions and it's difficult to kind of keep them engaged. It's okay just to sit with somebody and be with them. That is okay too. And so if possible, I think gather collateral information in a crisis, if they are needing additional treatment, or even oftentimes if we're safety planning with them, just having that family member can be so helpful, or a support system, or a friend, or sometimes we safety plan with neighbors. Some people have neighbors that just come out and they say, hey, I really care about this person, and they trust each other. And so, are there people that maybe have a little bit more information about the situation? Did someone else interact with this person before you? And that becomes important too, because if you do end up needing to call for an assessment or for someone else to respond, that's more information you have. And the more information that is being shared, the easier it can be to support a person in getting their needs met. Now, we do want to make sure we are also being careful, right, in terms of how much we're sharing with other people. We want to respect people's privacy and dignity still. And so there is a balance there, but oftentimes when someone's in crisis, our main thing is safety, trying to get them the support that they need. So if an individual is unwilling or unable to answer questions, just try to keep them engaged, just listen, validate, sit with them. And that's definitely okay too. Here's a quote by Dr. Mike Webster that says, if possible, never let a feeling go by without labeling it. People love to have others understand how they feel. So just sometimes just that validation and sitting and having someone be there can be so powerful. And then I think these are things that most of us have seen, heard before, but just some things to kind of think about. I know sometimes when I get frustrated, I'm just like, oh, like, calm down, it's going to be okay. It's our instinct to try to just soothe and say, I understand, everything's fine, like, I get it. When in reality, most of the time I don't get it. People share some things and I might not understand truly what they're going through. And so I think sometimes when we automatically say, I understand, and maybe we don't, or maybe someone is experiencing something a little bit differently, it puts that wall back up. I work with a lot of young adults who are unhoused, and I've never been unhoused, and so for me to say I understand, I can't, I wouldn't, but I'm seeking to learn. I want to know how it impacted you. So a lot of the time, some things we can say are, I see or I hear how angry you are. I can see how that can be really difficult. I'm listening. What's causing that? What's made you feel that way today? Why are we sad today? Tell me more about that, right? Just kind of asking some more of those questions, so that it feels more like we're engaging. We are seeking to understand rather than an interrogation. And in crisis, that can be so difficult because a lot of times, like I said, we just want to help. We just want things to be better. And that's not always the easiest to do. So these are things that we can practice as well. I try to practice this when people are not in crisis, just an everyday conversation, because once we make it pretty routine, it feels a lot easier and a lot more comfortable. So, yep. Okay.
Violet, would you be okay with a couple questions real quick?
Yes, sure.
Okay.
Yep.
One was, and I think that it kind of goes hand in hand. We have two members asking about some of our family members don't live in the same state as their loved ones who have mental health issues. One, if someone were to call their family outside of Tennessee and say that they're suicidal, would it be best to call the crisis line? Could the crisis line reach out? What would be the best course of action in that case? If you're out of
Yes.
state and you've gotten a phone call, I'm suicidal, but you're not in Tennessee.
Yep. If you're out of state, you're not in Tennessee. So there's a lot of options. You could always use, I think someone had put that 988 number in there. Now the issue is if you call that number and the person is unwilling to speak to them, the best option sometimes is gonna be, if you're worried about imminent harm, is calling that police line. And often police will go and they'll do a welfare check and they'll check in on the person. I know for some people it can be kind of daunting to do that, or people are a little bit wary oftentimes about engaging in police and mental health, and that's understandable. And so it really depends. I think, like I said, if you call that 988, they can give you the resource. Oftentimes they'll ask you what county you're in, and they can transfer you directly to that mobile crisis in the city where the person is, and kind of get resources that way. And again, it's so hard because there's not one answer. It really depends on whether the crisis is imminent, right? So if this person is saying, I have a knife or I have pills and I'm gonna use them, or maybe they're standing walking across a bridge, to me that is imminent, right? And so that would be a police call, because police will get there the quickest. They're the ones that are gonna arrive the fastest and be able to respond to something where that crisis is imminent. It's happening in the moment. Now, if a person is suicidal, and you're able to kind of talk with them and they're saying, no, I can keep myself safe, I just really need someone to talk to, I just need help, you can try to see if they're willing to three-way with you, to talk to the crisis line and to engage with them. That way you're still on the phone with them and able to support them, while on the other line you have someone being able to support both of you and walk through that. Did that answer the question? Oh, so the question too is, I guess, what is the best course of action? You get that person on a phone call and they refuse. I guess, is there a specific, like, are they refusing to talk to you on the phone, or are they refusing to kind of talk with other people?
Yeah, a lot of texting can happen. So if it's a situation where there's a lot of texting back and forth and it's obvious that things are escalating, and you say, okay, I'm gonna call you, or you call them to just make that a little bit more personal, and they say simply, I'm not going to I'm not going to get on a phone call with you. At that point, is it
Sure.
just keep validating via text messages and use
Yes.
texting as your medium?
I think that would be okay. You know, we find oftentimes people do not want to get on the phone. And some people do prefer texting. For some people, being on the phone is uncomfortable. It kind of adds to that vulnerability. They might not be at a place where they want to talk. And so
Harder to keep your emotions when it's the phone
yes.
call. Texting, it can seem more even-handed or more direct too, versus the crying and being upset and shutting down.
Yep. Yes. I think the important part is that the person is engaged with you. If they are texting back and forth, you know, you can do that, this validating through text message. I would usually in text, we tell people kind of keep it short and to the point. Oftentimes when we start texting a lot, things can get misconstrued. You know, tone could be misrepresented, or a person might read something, and if it's a lot and they're not, you know, in a good place where they're able to be engaged totally, oftentimes that those text messages can be difficult. So keeping it short, very direct, you know, I'm here, I want to support you, I'm listening, and then, you know, validate, and just kind of let them know you care about them. Now again, if they start texting and you're having that imminent harm, you feel that imminent, that they need help, that's kind of when, you know, I would say, okay, I don't feel comfortable doing this. I'm in another state. I want you to get help. So I'm going to reach out and get you some help because I care about you. I care about you and I don't want to see you hurt. And just being very direct, because a lot of times people want that directness. Sometimes I think it's hard if someone is not wanting help to say, hey, I want to help you. I'm going to send someone because I'm worried about you. And so, you know, be short in your messages and be direct with them and just validate.
Violet, we have a hand raised real quick. Khalil, do you have a question?
I do. So I have a question. So I volunteer with the crisis text line, and while I was being trained for that, one of the things they told us was actually like keep the messages longer. And so I wanted to like, I guess what your opinion on that was. And like, so they said like, I think their reasoning from what they told us, like if your messages aren't like long enough, the person may not think you care. I don't know. And so I just wanted to like what your opinion was, because they told us like keep your messages like a certain amount of characters.
Yep. So I think as a crisis, like because you're talking about like working as a crisis counselor, right? On the line.
Yes, that's right.
Yep. So I think, like I said, there's not a one size fits all. If you're speaking with, like, I think in the form of the question that the person asks is probably someone you know. So you're gonna know them well, you know, hopefully. And if it's someone you don't know, you know, you kind of have to feel it out, feel how they are. But if you're helping out a friend or a family member, someone you know how they're gonna feel, what's gonna work for them. I think in terms of like working for a crisis line, I think in that case, you probably want that to be a little longer because you're trying to get them engaged, right? You're trying to get more information, you're validating. And I also think in that situation, oftentimes if you're working in crisis, you maybe know a little bit more of what to say or how to approach it. And so I think, and I'm not sure, but I think that could be a reason why they're saying kind of keep it a little bit longer, right? Because at that point they're connected with someone who is there to listen. Like that's kind of their main goal, right? Your main goal as a crisis person texting is to keep them engaged, and they might not know you as well. And so I think you're probably having to do a little bit more to kind of work with them. Does that make sense?
It does, thank you. It was just interesting because, like, in the different positions, I just wanted to see what your opinion was, but that does make sense. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit different if you're in the role of like a friend or a person who is just reaching out and connecting with someone in the community, like a client, or versus if you're working in crisis and you're trying to keep them engaged and get all the information and be able to kind of keep them talking with you in that way. Yeah. Are there any other questions so far?
Don't think so.
Okay, awesome. I appreciate the work that you do. We need people in crisis. So, and yes, some people are more comfortable texting. So. Okay. So community response, what to expect. And so a lot of the times, you know, we're kind of talking about what happens if a person doesn't respond, or what happens if a person, maybe you're engaged with them and now you're kind of at that next step, right? Of like, what do I do next? Now I do want to say, just because a person is in crisis does not mean that they need these interventions necessarily, right? So some people might just be in an acute crisis where they just need to vent. They're just trying to get it out, talk to somebody. It might be they had something happen today. Maybe they got into a car accident and are feeling very stressed, or maybe got some bad news, or just bills are piling up, you know, that type of thing, and they just want to talk. So just because someone is maybe saying, hey, I'm feeling like I want to hurt myself, does not always mean that they're in crisis where they need kind of this intervention. For some people, they might be able to say, okay, I know I said that, and they have a lot of insight, and they know, like, okay, I was really frustrated, you know, I have my family here, and we might determine, okay, this person is okay, you know, they just made the statement, but we don't feel like they're in that crisis where they need all this. But I just wanted to let you guys know just what to expect. I think sometimes working with someone in crisis, again, you know, it can be nerve-wracking to maybe call somebody else or to engage with other people. And so sometimes knowing the process can be helpful. Now, some different cities might be a little different, but for the most part, like I said, this is kind of how that process will go. So Davidson County Mobile Crisis is a 615-726-0125 number. There are also, later I have some resources too about talk lines and other numbers as well. But oftentimes the crisis line in your county, or the overall suicide hotline, will support via phone. You know, they'll talk to the person or talk to you who's supporting, and talk on the phone to safety plan, or to help kind of determine what those next steps are. We have a crisis walk-in center in Nashville at 250 Cumberland Bend. So our crisis walk-in center is where people can present themselves, or they can bring somebody else, a client, a loved one, someone, you know, that you're working with, and they get an assessment there. And so that's just if someone is willing and wanting to present in person. We also have in Nashville what we call Partners in Care. I'd be interested to see if anyone else who's living in any of the other cities have a program. I know there's some other cities in the states that do, where our crisis counselors will partner with the police department and actually ride in the cars. So whenever police respond, our counselors respond at the same time with them to provide crisis intervention, supports, de-escalation. It could be, sometimes it's a person that needs food resources. They're stressed about taking care of their family. And oftentimes we go out there and we work to prevent that crisis, right? I think that's a part of crisis work too, is if we can get ahead of the crisis, oftentimes that's what we're trying to do. So we work during the week in Nashville, 6 a.m. to 12 a.m. We have someone in the car with our officers. And then I see something in the chat. So I will finish this last part, and then maybe we can see if there's questions or comments.
They were just commenting that Murfreesboro has a similar, and so does Indianapolis.
Oh, yep, perfect. I love that. I think more and more cities are working towards this model, just because oftentimes it is helpful, you know, to have both sides of that, to have that safety, but to also have somebody who can come in and keep somebody engaged and de-escalate, and can have those resources for the families as well.
And I will say this, Violet, no one wishes a mental health crisis on anyone, but if you're going to have one, having one in Davidson County is very beneficial in Middle Tennessee. A lot of the outside counties do not have these programs. They do not deal with it in the same way.
Yep. Yes. So hopefully, you know, as we grow and as we talk more and advocate for people, hopefully it will be able to expand, and other places will have programs similar. It's a lot of advocacy work for sure. So this last piece is that police EMS intervention. So oftentimes, like I said, this happens if there's like an acute situation, or sometimes too, if we talked about texting with someone, if we're texting with someone and we get to the point where they're no longer engaged, you know, where they are not really texting back, or we can't get them on the phone anymore. Oftentimes, you know, that is the time that we need to call for that welfare check, for someone to come check in with them, make sure they're okay when they stop engaging. And so oftentimes we call police or EMS if there's those concerns, or if transportation is needed, maybe this person needs to go to the ER or hospital. They can't get themselves there. That is another option for our community response. So those are the pieces there. So what happens next, right? So we're talking about a crisis. Oftentimes there are different steps that can happen depending on where a person is in their crisis. So safety planning in the community. Like I said earlier, just because someone is saying, you know, they're having a hard time or having a bad day, doesn't automatically, right, put them in that crisis. That crisis is more of the imminent harm. Like, are they going to be a harm to themselves or others? Have they already hurt themselves? Is there a fear? You know, sometimes we take into account historical information. You know, they say a person who has had more attempts or has had trauma from knowing family members who have died by suicide. Oftentimes those kind of create more of those red flags. And so a lot of times that's why gathering or having some of that collateral information can be really important. When we go out there on scenes, we're asking family members, you know, have you seen anything different with this person? You know, did this happen today? Or have we seen kind of changes in their appetite or behaviors in the last week? Is this something different? Is this the first time? So if you're there with a person in crisis, you're going to get a lot of questions asked. And so that's why we're saying it's good to know kind of what to expect, because oftentimes, you know, your adrenaline might be going, or you might be really worried about this person and you just want them to get help. But just be prepared that, you know, someone's going to ask you some questions too and talk with you about what's going on. So with safety planning in the community, that could look like just providing someone with community resources, you know, providing someone with that crisis number or with a talk line number or that 988 number, which you can call or text. So that's nice. You can call or text that number. And so it could be outpatient treatment, you know, it could be, oftentimes we'll refer people who might not need immediate treatment. We will refer them directly to get those counseling services, the medication, that type of thing. And then we have diversion. Again, I am not sure what it looks like in other cities. In Nashville, we have diversion treatment, which is mental health co-op has like a walk-in center where it's not inpatient, but it's also where a person can stay. So they stay there anywhere from like 1 to usually like 4 or 5 days. They get stabilized on medications. It's a voluntary program, so people who come in need to want to get treatment. They participate in groups. They end up, before getting discharged, they can get connected if they need to transition to a rehab facility for alcohol and drug use, or if maybe they want a case manager and work on housing, some of those basic needs that we were talking about earlier that might put someone in a crisis. That's kind of where that diversion treatment comes in, where you're able to participate in some of that. It's a lower level of care than being hospitalized, but still an environment where there's people there, you're safe, you're engaging in treatment. And then the last one is inpatient hospitalization. So that's kind of like this highest level of care. This is where oftentimes, you know, people can't maintain, they're not able to maintain safety in the community. And so we have what's called 6401, which is if someone's kind of getting detained for an assessment, you can't assess them in the moment because maybe they're unable to answer questions, or oftentimes if it's people who are maybe intoxicated, but a danger to themselves or others. And then a 6404, which is that involuntary hold. So that's basically saying, hey, at this point, you are a danger to yourself or others, and you have to get treatment now. Now, there are going to be people who are not going to want treatment, and taking someone's rights away is a really big deal. And so oftentimes, you know, it needs to happen, but always is a last resort. When we work in crisis, our goal is hopefully like the least restrictive, right? So we want to go for that safety planning first if we're able to. Safety planning is so important because you can engage a person's family, a person's community, their support system, their resources. And oftentimes we find that in the long term that can be really helpful. But unfortunately, there are also times when that is not an option because a person's needing that higher level of care in the moment. And then I think for other states, every state has their form of like a 6401, 6404. It's an involuntary hold. I think it's called something a little bit different in other states, but every state will have this process.
And I wanted to bring up just real quick that George had mentioned it when you were talking earlier, that Vanderbilt also has a walk-in assessment at 1601 23rd Avenue. So there are options depending on where you're at. But
yep. Yes. So Vanderbilt, Vanderbilt Pass, their psychiatric assessment center has a walk-in. They're open from 8 a.m. to 11 p.m. They're wonderful. You walk in, they'll do an assessment, and they will provide resources if that's what the person needs. They have inpatient hospitalization there. There's actually quite a few places in Nashville where you can walk in. So a lot of people don't know this, but oftentimes at the inpatient hospital, so there's, I think someone's talking about Murfreesboro. There's a place called, there's Rolling Hills, which is in Franklin, and then Trust Point, which is in Murfreesboro. And those are both where they're an inpatient facility, but you can walk in and they'll complete an assessment there as well. So oftentimes, if you are able to find an inpatient hospital, they will kind of help you and support you with completing an assessment with the individual. So don't feel like you need to do that on your own. So I think the difference between a 6401 and 04, I explained it a little bit, but I can go into a little bit more detail about it. So with an 01, that's just your first hold. So that is where we have concerns about safety for an individual, but we're unable to get that assessment completed. Again, that could be because of medical needs. So sometimes we see that people have harmed themselves and they need medical attention before we can complete an assessment, right? Maybe they've cut themselves and they're needing to go to the hospital, and we don't want to hold them from getting that treatment. So that's a time. Or again, sometimes it could be, we get people who are intoxicated, right? Sometimes people drink, and we have people who make statements, suicidal statements. And at that point, you know, maybe we're asking them questions, right? Are you feeling suicidal? And they might be too intoxicated to give us an answer, or their answer might be, you know, I'm not sure, I don't know. And so that doesn't give us an accurate representation of what's going on with the person. And so with that 01, it sends them to the hospital. The hospital basically will clear them and then call the crisis center for an assessment and say, hey, this person is clear. They're ready and able to be assessed now. So then we're able to get a better understanding of what's happening with this person to determine next best steps. Whereas that 6404 is saying that we've already completed an assessment and we're determining this person needs to be hospitalized, and we're sending them to the hospital, or sometimes we send them directly inpatient if they don't need medical care. Now with that 04, what I was saying is it's a lot, right? To take a person's rights away and say you have to be hospitalized. So with that, the crisis counselor generally signs that first one. And then when they get to the hospital, the doctor there has to sign a second one. And they'll either agree and say this person is in crisis and needs to be hospitalized, or they might do an assessment and say, we actually think this person is doing okay, we're going to safety plan with them. So there's a lot of layers to it. But every state has their own process for involuntary hospitalizations. Yeah. And then, so just some best practices. So if it's safe, spend time building rapport with the client or person, whoever it is that you're working with. Oftentimes it's helpful to keep them talking, kind of keep them engaged, even if it's not about the stressor they're experiencing. You know, maybe they're like, I don't want to talk about that. You know, today was hard. Like, I just don't want to talk about it, right? If they don't want to talk about it, if you see them kind of getting agitated, right? Maybe their fists are kind of getting balled, or they're kind of getting more withdrawn, where they're trying to like not really engage with you anymore. You can tell they're getting fidgety. Try talking about something else. As long as you're keeping them engaged in the moment until they're ready to talk, or until you have someone else who's coming to be able to kind of assess the situation. That's the biggest part, just building that relationship. Don't make any promises about what can or will happen if we cannot guarantee it. This is a very big one. I think in the moment, it's very easy if somebody is saying, you know, I don't want to go to the hospital. I promise that this won't happen again. You know, I was just upset. I didn't really mean to. It's very easy to say, you know, I'm going to call mobile crisis, but I promise you won't go to the hospital, right? Like, I'm just going to call your mom and she's just going to come take you home. You know, I promise I'm not going to let that happen, right? Unfortunately, that's not a promise we can keep, right? If we're working with a person's parent or mobile crisis might come and say, actually, this person's not doing well. They need to go to the hospital. And now we've made promises. And if the next time this person's in crisis, they're probably not going to be as trusting. They're going to say, you know, last time I called, you told me this wasn't going to happen and it happened, right? And so it's very easy. And I think sometimes we get really uncomfortable and we just want that person to be okay. So we make promises. But that's a really important piece, is we don't want to make promises that we cannot guarantee. Let the client know that you care about them and provide encouragement. You know, just let the person know, like, hey, I really care about you. This is why, you know, I'm calling for help, or I really care about you. This is why I'm asking you all these questions. I just want you to be safe. And sometimes, like, it's okay too to give people some choices. You know, a lot of the times when we're working with people in crisis in the community and we are having to do that involuntary hospitalization, we'll ask them, you know, right now we have to go to the hospital. We have a lot of safety concerns and this is what's happening. But I just want to see, you know, are you more comfortable going with police or on the ambulance? Some people trust police, want to go with police. Some people feel more comfortable on the ambulance. Some people don't want that ambulance bill, right? And so, you know, wherever we can, still giving that person a voice and choice can be really important in building rapport, right? We talk about phone call versus texting. If that person is more comfortable texting, you know, you could try calling them a couple times. If they're like, I don't want to answer, say, okay, like, let's just keep texting then, you know, we'll keep chatting this way. Giving them choice where possible. And then being transparent and honest about what's happening. You know, it's okay to say, I'm not sure what's going to happen next, but right now I'm calling mobile crisis because I'm not sure what to do and I'm worried about your safety. Remember that every situation will be different, you know. Again, some people might prefer just sitting there listening to you, kind of chat with them, talk with them. Some people might be more withdrawn. Some people might want you to sit with them. Some people might just want you to stand outside the door while you wait for somebody to come in, right? So every situation is different. Every crisis looks a little bit different. Remember too that sometimes care can turn into enabling. I'm guilty of this. You know, if a client is consistently coming in with a crisis, or a person is coming in with a crisis a lot, work with them on maybe setting those boundaries for your role, what you can or cannot do for them, and then try to refer them to these resources. You know, you're not alone in this. And oftentimes, again, we really want to help. You know, I work as a therapist too, and sometimes I'm really bad about answering the phone at 11 p.m. at midnight. I had someone call me the other day at midnight to tell me about the show they were watching. And I was like, okay, this is not something you call somebody, right? Like at 11 12 midnight about. I get you're excited, and I'm really happy you're excited about this. But I think I just, you know, had maybe crossed that boundary a little bit where they felt like, hey, if I'm excited or if I need something, I can just always call you. And that's not necessarily a good thing, because what if they are in crisis and I don't answer, but I haven't provided them with the resources of what to do, right, in a crisis. So sometimes, again, we try to be helpful, and that's important, but also it's important to loop other people into and let our people, our family, let them know, like, hey, I'm here for you, but here are some appropriate routes to take.
Violet, we have a question about best practice.
Of
What
course.
is best practice about someone who's clearly delusional? Do you confront their delusions or just get them to keep talking?
That is a wonderful question. I know I talked a lot about kind of that suicidal harm to self or harm to others, but psychosis is a whole nother battle. So someone who is clearly delusional, I think it's important to find that balance. We always tell people, you know, you don't play into their delusions, right? You don't, for example, we had someone the other day who was delusional, you know, believed that microwaves were hacking him and his phone and just taking all his information, and that they were after him because he knew some secrets that he couldn't share. And the delusion got pretty bad where he was calling detectives to report it pretty often. And so with someone who is pretty clearly delusional, you know, we don't want to play into those delusions. We don't want to say, yeah, like I my microwave does that too, or like, you know, I get what that feels like. And so, you know, I think it is okay though to kind of what we were talking about earlier, right? Like kind of talk with them and say, you know, that sounds really difficult. Do you feel, you know, how are you feeling about them kind of tracking you, things like that. You know, it's okay to engage with how they're feeling and kind of get them talking. And it's okay too to ask questions, right? Seek to understand. Oftentimes, kind of talking with them. Now, I will say a lot of the times people who are delusional, if you are confronting them directly about them, that kind of causes them to like shut down, right? So if you kind of tell them, what are you talking about? Like, there's no way microwaves are hacking your phone or hacking you. Like, that's just really silly. Like, logically, that doesn't make sense. You know, there are people who think they're helping because they're trying to explain it, right? We're saying that doesn't make sense at all. It's okay, depending on who you're talking to, like maybe you start out saying that, and if you feel them really pushing back or getting agitated, then we don't want to confront them to the point where they're like, you know, you don't believe me, I don't want to kind of engage anymore, right? So it's that fine line, it's that fine balance of we're not validating their delusions. We're kind of seeking to understand a little bit more in order to get them the support that they need. Yes.
There was another question. If you have a major crisis with a delusional psychotic person who continues arguing with you, do you call mobile crisis?
So again, I think that's so difficult, right? Because it's going to be different with different people. Sometimes we get people who their baseline or just kind of how they are every day. When we say baseline, you know, we're saying how they are every day, is that they're delusional. You know, like there are people who believe that aliens are going to come down and kidnap us, but that's just their belief. That's their regular belief that they have kind of all the time. Now, if a person who maybe they have that belief, now their mental health is maybe getting a little bit worse, and now, you know, they're saying, I need to go get a gun, I need to kill these aliens, I need to be ready when they come for me. You know, my neighbor's an alien, like I need to keep an eye out for them. And you know, they're now acting on the delusions, right? I think oftentimes that's what puts people into that crisis, right? Into that now they are acting on this belief and potentially could harm their neighbor, could harm someone else. They could confront their neighbor, who their neighbor might end up hurting them, you know, if they go over there. And so with this question of if you have a delusional psychotic person who continues to argue with you, do you call mobile crisis? That really depends. Do you feel like, it depends on if you feel like this person is in imminent harm. Because of these delusions, are they going to hurt someone else or themselves? Is this a delusion they have all the time? Kind of like I had it earlier on here, you know, we can kind of go back to this, right? It's not necessarily our role to determine like, okay, is this a crisis or not? If you feel like it could be, if you're uncomfortable leaving that person alone, if you're on the phone with someone arguing and you're like, oh, I don't think I can hang up. Like, I don't think this person's okay. You know, if you're getting that feeling, call mobile crisis, because they'll kind of walk you through and say, okay, they'll ask you more questions, kind of to help you determine if it is a crisis. Maybe you hang up with the person, you really think about it, and you kind of have that feeling of, oh yeah, like some of those conversations didn't feel right. Some of the things they said really are concerning me. Those are some signs that, yeah, loop in mobile crisis. And so that's kind of the long answer, I guess. It's a little bit different for everybody, right? It's different because mental illness is such a broad spectrum, right? So like I said, like some people they have these illusions. That's how they live every day. And so that person would potentially not be in a crisis, right? But now if you're acting on it, or if there's threats made, anytime there's a threat being made, that's kind of where we do want to involve somebody. The follow-up question, will mobile crisis determine if they send someone out, or will they automatically send someone? So they do not automatically send people. There are some cities where they do send them out, depending on the call, depending on the city, depending on how they work. In Davidson County, they will not automatically send someone out. Oftentimes they try to initially kind of talk on the phone with that person or talk to you to determine if they're in crisis. They'll kind of ask you some of the questions that we talked about today. You know, has this person made any threats? Has this person harmed themselves? What are your concerns? Is this something that's new behavior, or have you been seeing this, you know, for a long time? They'll ask a lot of questions to determine if they'll send someone out. Again, there are times when they might determine, hey, we don't think this person is meeting criteria for a crisis. We're not going to come do that assessment. So that does happen. If that happens and you're still concerned, that's where you can call that 911 or non-emergency. Now, obviously 911 is like if it's imminent harm, right? Like you need someone there right away. Police do also have a non-emergency number that you can call for a welfare check, to send someone out to check on them. This might be, you know, that delusional person who's delusional that you've been arguing with, that you feel, okay, I don't think they're in imminent harm. I don't think they're going to hurt themselves, but I still have concerns about them. I want someone to go just check on them. That's where you can call that non-emergency number and have someone kind of check in with them. So that's kind of where that is. Yeah. Yep. So over here at the end here, we have a resource guide. So this is I got myself. So this is our crisis resource guide. This is something that we give to everybody whenever we go out to see them. We just provide them with additional resources. So we're trying to revamp it to include more of like, because we are finding sometimes, especially in Nashville, we're finding people who are visiting from other states, or people who want to support people living, you know, family members in other states, things like that. And so we're actually working. I love that there's people kind of everywhere on here, because we're trying to work to make it where we're including more of those like nationwide resources. But right now, here's our guide. We always tell people, you know, this is our crisis number if it's an emergency, our walk-in services. And then we also provide some of those like counseling case management services, and then these different support services. So we have NAMI on here as well. And so, you know, I think there's just some resources we want to give people, some A&D resources. And then here there's, you know, the crisis talk line. So again, if you maybe feel like someone is not in crisis, but you just want to provide them with, you know, here's some extra numbers, you know, here's a number you can call if you just want to talk to somebody. You can provide them with some of these numbers and resources. Again, this is, you know, mostly Nashville area. You know, I think this domestic violence hotline, those crisis lines are national, but this is something that we share with people. Yes, this will be included in the email. Does anyone have any other questions or thoughts? You guys had some really good questions. I appreciate it.
Is somebody in a delusion considered a crisis? If someone is in a very calm, hey, I just typed out a bunch of reasons why X, Y, and Z person and I have been working together for a long time, and it's a delusion. They send off that email, you know, that person is not lashing out. The person is not, how do you define that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Oftentimes, you know, I think we kind of determine it based on, you know, they could be really calm, right? It could make a lot of sense to them. And oftentimes it's really difficult because the people that we're talking to, they truly believe in these illusions, right? They truly believe that these things are happening. And so a lot of times it does sound like it's second nature, right? It's like they're telling you these things and you're like, oh yeah. And so in terms of kind of determining that crisis, it depends sometimes on like how persistent or fixated they are, right? So if a person's maybe having this one conversation with you, they're very calm about it. It's kind of like they're telling you about what they ate for breakfast, right? So in that moment, you probably can't determine if that person, you know, in one conversation, you might not feel like they're in crisis, especially again, if they're just kind of telling you about it. Now, if every conversation you're having with them is kind of fixated on this, and they're telling you about it more and more, and it sounds like maybe the delusions, they have more details about it, and they're spending their day, right? Like, oh, I don't know if I can leave my house today, you know, like I feel like, you know, someone's monitoring me, or you know, like once it becomes kind of persistent, that's one way where you could potentially tell if a delusion is kind of getting into that place of where they're becoming in crisis. Like, is this affecting their life now? Is it affecting their decisions? Is it affecting the way that they live? That can happen, you know, where a crisis does not just happen immediately, right? In the beginning, we kind of talked about the crisis just being this one situation, but for some people, they do okay, but slowly we find that they get into that crisis, where they're so preoccupied maybe with the delusion that they're not leaving the house, they're not eating. Like we've had people who over time, you know, they thought a family member was poisoning them, and so they stopped eating the food. So at that point, they're not able to care for themselves. You know, their delusions is causing them to be unsafe, to engage in some of these unsafe behaviors. Again, if a person's not eating, right, we might be like, okay, they're not eating, but they're not hurting anyone, you know. But over time, if you're not eating and you're delusional and you believe this, you do end up hurting yourself. So sometimes it might not be apparent right away. Sometimes it is kind of over time you start seeing that. Yep. Did I answer the question?
Yes.
Yep. Perfect. Yep. Yes. Sometimes, yeah, it's actually really interesting. I think that's a myth too. You know, sometimes when we think of crisis, and I appreciate you all telling me at the beginning, you know, we think of crisis as these big emotions. We think of crisis as someone wanting to hurt themselves, but oftentimes it is the psychosis, you know, it's the delusions, people who are paranoid, people who kind of have those voices telling them what to do. That's a little bit harder, but those are definitely, that's considered crisis as well. So definitely some things to look out for, and just to remember, it's not all of a sudden. It can build up over time. And a person, we might see someone on Friday, they're not in crisis, and by Saturday, things have just gotten worse, where they are now in crisis. Yep. So I will say, you know, don't give up. If you really care about a person and you're worried about them, and I think someone had asked, you know, if you call mobile crisis, will they immediately come out? They might say, hey, this person's really not meeting this criteria for crisis right now, but that does not mean you don't call again later. Just because they're not meeting criteria right now, it's easy, I think, sometimes to get discouraged. You know, our mental health system has a long way to go. There are a lot of gaps still. And so it's easy to get discouraged. But if someone is not in crisis that day, if you continue to have concerns about them, it is okay to call again and say, you know, they're still expressing these things. You know, I've noticed this is happening. And so don't feel like just because a professional is saying they're not in crisis that you can't reach out and try again.
So when you're dealing with like partners in care and the police, I'll say, you know, I've had mixed responses with the police when I'm dealing with them in mental health.
Sure.
And so like what ways have you guys trained them on the regular to kind of recognize things and to like to the point that you just made? Because a lot of times I'll run into the situation where someone is having a really, really serious delusion that's impacting their safety. But you know, they're not saying, I'm gonna kill myself or I'm gonna hurt someone. And so the police will say, I'm not even going to call mobile crisis because I already know they're not going to do anything.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you handle that?
That's a great question. And that happens, unfortunately, a lot. So our officers, at least in Nashville, the officers that our partners in care counselors ride with all receive a 40-hour training. So the training is solely focused on mental health. We had Robin from NAMI come before she retired. She used to come and speak with our officers for an hour and a half about working with people with mental illness and advocating and things of that sort. So we have community partners that come in and really share their experience working with people in the community. We have peer advocates that come in, peer supporters who come share their experiences, personal experiences, and answer questions about what it's like to have police respond to people in crisis or respond to our unhoused community. And so they get this training, so they get a little bit more exposure to the people that they're engaging with and working with. They get active listening skills. They practice scenarios. And the goal is to hopefully eventually have all officers trained in this 40-hour training, at least in Nashville and Davidson County. So that is the hope, that not only our partners in care officers get this training, but that everybody is trained. The cool thing I found about this program too is I have noticed some of our officers pick up on what the questions we ask and how we respond to people. So sometimes we find that when they're riding with us, they're starting to ask those questions. I had one officer, he was like, I'm going to try to do your job for you. So he'll go in and kind of build that rapport and ask those questions, and he'll come back and be like, how did I do? So we do have some officers that are excited about it. However, you are right. On the other side of that, there are times when, you know, police go out on a call and they say, well, I don't think they're going to come out for this, or, you know, I don't think this person's meeting criteria. If that happens, while police are out there, you are welcome as well to kind of give that mobile crisis number a call. When police are there, it's okay to say, hey, like, I'm gonna call just to check in with them. Do you mind just kind of staying, just so in case, you know, they're sending someone or someone comes out, that we have that extra support. If they give you pushback, I mean, you have my email now. You could always let me know, and I'm happy to we can kind of brainstorm and advocate together. And so that's, you know, we want to know, you know, when where the system kind of has those breakdowns. I know that doesn't help in the moment, but hopefully if we're having more of these conversations and doing some more advocating, some of that hopefully can be minimized. And then unfortunately, like, again, if you feel like this person is in crisis and police come out and they're like, no, we feel like this person is fine, you might have to call again. You know, we've had times where somebody's called like 4 times before we were able to get that person into inpatient treatment. Now, if a person is willing to come present to mobile crisis or present to the ER, we can also get them support that way. I know sometimes it's hard when a person feels like they don't need help or treatment to get them to come in. But sometimes it does take a few times, unfortunately. Just to be very honest, there are times where people might fall through the gaps a little bit, and it takes that 5th or 6th call. And I think that's also where it's really important. I think I mentioned earlier to collect as much collateral as we can. If someone is sending you messages and you have those concerning messages, like, police are more often to act on those and call mobile or call us out if they have, you know, that concrete evidence, or if you're able to explain to them, this is why I feel like this person's in crisis. And I think that's why maybe trainings like these are really important, right? Because if you're able to explain to them, hey, I think this is why a person is a danger to themselves or others, or this is very different behavior than I saw yesterday, right? Being able to explain why we're concerned can make a big difference too in getting that support.
Violet, is your physical presentation done?
Oh,
Did you
yes,
get
I
the
can.
slides? I was gonna say, if
I'll
we can
stop share
if we can bring that down, just everybody can see each other.
just to see people. Yeah, sure.
Right. We are coming up on 7:45. This goes till 8, but I do want to give people a chance to ask questions. So let's make this our last chance to ask any questions you want of Violet.
Yeah, and great point, great comment here. Try to be conscious and informed as possible for our vulnerable populations. Yeah. You know, I think we were talking a lot about police, and sometimes like that might not be the best for some of the populations that we do work with. And so I think that's why too, being very proactive in seeing where we can connect people before the crisis even happens. That way we can loop other people in.
And I'm going to put your email address in the chat.
Yes. I'll include it. I'll go ahead before I send you this PowerPoint. I will include it in the PowerPoint as well. That way, if people have follow-up questions, please feel free to email me. If you are in Davidson County and you have concerns with the police interaction, please also feel free to email me. You know, again, we partner with the police, but they are their own entity, and so I can't. Speaking of promises and guarantees, I can't promise that they're gonna come to every call and respond with our mental health people as we feel like they should. However, I am and willing and would love to advocate for all our people and have these conversations of where we can do better and bridge that gap. But if you are in Nashville, and it is right now, unfortunately, we don't do weekends, but if it's during the week, you can always request a Partners in Care car. And hopefully one of me or one of the counselors will come out with officers to respond.
Do we have any further questions? And we do have many thanks that we've had. Thank you, Shannon. We have had many thanks in the chat tonight for you coming out, Violet. And being
Thank you. I'm so
about
excited. You all had the best questions, and you're super engaged, and I love it so much.
Right. Last call for questions before I make
I have one more, if that's okay.
Sure. Yeah, that's why we're here.
I was just gonna say, I know there's a phrase that you said a lot, and I hear it a lot too. Of they don't meet criteria. Is it okay to ask the person doing the call or taking the call what criteria they're not meeting?
Sure. Yes. They should be able to tell you. if we're doing the work and we're saying someone's not meeting criteria, we should always be able to back it up and explain why. You know, if we're able to explain why someone is meeting criteria and we're willing to hospitalize and go that route, we should always be able to advocate and explain why someone is not meeting criteria. It's okay to say, hey, can you just, I'm having a hard time understanding why an assessment's not being completed. Can you just explain, you know, why this person's not meeting criteria? Or maybe sometimes too, it's even helpful to ask, because if you're asking, they might say, well, you know, they said they wanted to harm themselves, but there was no talk of like suicidal statements, or because oftentimes self-harm and being suicidal is different, right? Some people might self-harm, but not with the intent to kill themselves. So it might be the case where we're explaining a situation to someone and they're saying this person's self-harming, but they're not suicidal. And once you have that information, you might be able to come back and say, no, actually, you know, my friend's here and he made this suicidal statement, you know, today to this person. And so that's actually a really great point. You should always be able to ask and get an answer. And even getting that answer could help you, right? Because oftentimes, like, if you don't work in crisis, you might not know what to share, right? You might be overwhelmed supporting a person. So you might not know what to say to a crisis counselor or an officer responding. And so when you ask questions, it might kind of jog your memory or kind of help you be like, okay, well, actually, they did mention these things. Yeah, that was a great point.
All right, any other further questions? I'll take that as a no. One, I want to thank Violet Gao for coming out tonight, taking time out of her schedule to present to us on this important topic. Many of us have been in crisis or have had family members in crisis, so this is very helpful, Violet. We appreciate you coming out tonight. I would like to let you all know that we do have our next education session planned. It is a youth-based education session for Wednesday, April 17th. We have someone coming out from the Nashville OCD and Anxiety Treatment Center. They are going to be talking about anxiety and OCD in youth. And again, youth, depending on your definition, usually can go up to 25 years old. But again, we are focusing on youth anxiety and OCD, and that's April 17th from 6:30 to 8. We do hold our education sessions in the evenings on Wednesdays typically. All that information is in my Monday emails, sometimes in the Wednesday emails that I send out to everyone who's registered and all of our members. I also want to remind everyone to mark May 18th on their calendar. That is our annual NAMI walks. We are first time at First Horizon Park, where the Nashville Sounds play. That is going to be May 18th. The walk starts at 10 a.m. We are offering children 12 and under a chance to run the bases at 9 a.m. So please come out to that. It is our biggest fundraiser, but it's also our biggest awareness event. We had almost 600 people come out in the pouring rain last year. Hopefully our weather will be a little bit different this year, but even if it isn't, we're going to have a good time. So I also want to let you all know that Robin Nobling, our current executive director, is officially retiring from her service March 31st. So starting next week, we will have a new executive director. But Robin has served for almost 12 years. We appreciate her work. She'll be staying on as a volunteer for some of our support groups and programs. But she is retired from NAMI Davidson and serving the community. So if you have her work cell number or her work email, she will no longer be replying to any of that after March 31st. So please direct anything to me instead at outreach@namidavidson.org. Other than that, I want to thank you all for supporting our programs. Keep an eye out for our Monday emails. And this program tonight will be on our YouTube channel, which is NAMI D Info on YouTube. I will be sending a link to it on Monday, but it will be on YouTube more than likely by late tomorrow morning. The audio version of it. Plus, Violet has been nice enough she'll be sharing the PowerPoint presentation with me, and I will email all of you. All registrants for our education sessions when the presenter is willing, will receive the PowerPoint after the presentation is complete, so you can follow along and reference it. So other than that, I'd like to thank you all for coming. Again, thank you again, Violet, for being with us tonight. And I want to wish everyone a wonderful holiday weekend.